Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Today we have Jefferson Beavers. Jefferson is a board member for Fresno Film Works. Jefferson, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mr. Sevag. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome back, I should say,
Thank
to
you.
the program.
Yeah, this is the first time I've been on the TV version, but yeah,
Right.
thank you for having me.
I remember last year you were at the radio studio.
That's right.
Much different.
Absolutely, absolutely. Actually, I think it's been a couple years now, maybe since '09 or '10 even.
Jefferson, before we talk about Fresno Film Works, I want to ask you about your career. You've had a fascinating career. You know, you've worked a little bit on the Daily Collegian, you've done some writing. Talk about that.
Thank you, Sevag. I've been a journalist for a while now. I started out at my hometown newspaper, the Dinuba Sentinel, when I was in high school. Bob Raison, just recently retired. Kind of worked my way up to some paper in the Bay Area, the Fairfield Daily Republic, back to Modesto and Fresno Bees. And then I was lucky enough after my graduate program to be the faculty advisor of the Collegian, student paper at Fresno State, and then a radio host at KFSR, where we first met, and loved it there. And since then, I've been teaching journalism and film studies and English at Fresno City College, and I'm also now on the board of Fresno Film Works. What
is it about news that gets you excited? I mean, your whole career has been following or writing the news.
News. Well, I mean, there's news all around you. I don't actually tend to think of news as, you know, headlines or breaking news. I actually tend to think of it as, like faces and places. And when I teach my students the news, that's how I like to kind of present it to them. So those are the kinds of stories I like to tell myself, and they're what I'm drawn to. And that's actually kind of what connects me to film, because I love to see those kinds of stories, you know, in that way.
So you are an instructor at Fresno City College. The students that you have in your classes, do they want to be reporters or journalists, or what do they want to do?
That's a good question. I often wonder what they want to do. I teach mostly introductory courses. I'm a part-time instructor, so I usually get the Introduction to Mass Comm, which is a big survey course, and also Intro to Film Studies, which is also a general ed survey course. And so I see a lot of students kind of at the beginning of their education experience. About half my students are just general ed, you know, all kinds of majors. But the journalism students that I see, actually, they're most interested in broadcasting.
Okay.
And I always kind of wonder, you know, what exactly about broadcasting they're interested in. I think they see people on TV and they think that that's kind of what I want to do. Maybe they don't realize, you know, all the other elements that are behind that, and you know, the difficulty in making a living, and, you know, an industry that's kind of struggling. But I think most of them want to be digital journalists, online journalists, broadcast journalists, storytellers of some kind. So that's what I've seen. A few of them want to make money. They want to go into business or public relations, but most of them want to be broadcasters.
How important, in your opinion, is the news? I mean, I know a lot of people who don't really follow the news. They don't really care about what's going on around them. Should they?
Well, I mean, I think it depends on how you define news. News, maybe in the sense that we're talking about something you see on a newspaper or see on the evening news on your, you know, on your broadcast networks. I don't always think of news in that way. Again, I tend to think of it as storytelling and kind of getting out on the ground and finding those faces and places that make stories. So I think that the students are plugged into news through their social media. You know, they get a lot of their material from Facebook or just, you know, text messaging. And so I think they make their own news. And I think their idea of news is kind of changing our collective idea of news, you know? So yeah, maybe not news in the sense that you and I know it, but a new kind of, I don't know, kind of like specially crafted news, like my news, your news, plugged into yourself kind of a thing.
You actually brought up something I was going to go into next, but since you brought it up,
Okay.
let's talk about it now. Social media.
Okay.
Has it made news relevant, or has it changed news?
Man, these are hard questions. Well, I mean, it certainly changed news. The speed by which that news can be sent, disseminated, shared, etc. I think that in some cases it's changed news for the better. We have certainly a lot more, a lot more messages more quickly. The downside, though, is just basic accessibility. In a place like the Central San Joaquin Valley, I know you do a lot of work with underserved communities, and the digital divide is pretty pretty visible, especially when I teach the students at City College. Not everybody has a smartphone with the latest gadgets and high-speed internet, and so I think maybe when you're a quote-unquote Fresno creative, you can get wrapped up in how much social media kind of controls your life, but when you really kind of build out from that immediate group, social media maybe isn't as doesn't have a big hold on people, I think, as maybe it does people of our age, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of an interesting.
Another interesting question I'm going to ask you is writing.
Okay.
You've read and written a lot of things in your career. How important is writing? I mean, a lot of people use slang, or now when you get a text message, the "you" is just a "you."
Sure.
How important is proper spelling in writing?
Proper writing. You mean like English grammar and stuff like that? I mean, I think that writing is writing. I think that understanding your audience, to whom you are sending that message to, is like essential. I think I hate to sound like an old guy, but students these days they just write in a different mode, and I think still writing properly with the good grammar and the good vocabulary is still, of course, relevant, important. But I also think that other shorthand forms of writing and quick writing is just different writing, and I think sometimes the old timers might be a little quick to judge that. I just had a friend today on Facebook. She posted that she had reached her 10,000th tweet since 2009. She's a journalism educator, a friend of mine, and she said, I could have written like that's the same as in 2 books. But the flip side of it is, she has, I think, something like 700 or 800 followers. She's made a lot of friends and colleagues through those tweets, and I follow her for journalism education in particular. So I think that's just as legitimate as of an accomplishment. We just had Roger Ebert pass away a couple days ago, and he's a very prolific film critic in a very traditional kind of format, newspapers. But he's also was a prolific Twitter user. And I think that you could be just as effective or just as interesting communicating in that way as a more traditional way. So I try not to hate too much on those forms.
Let's talk about Fresno Film Works.
Okay.
You're on the board there. What is this organization?
Fresno Film Works is an all-volunteer nonprofit. We've been around here in Fresno since 2002. We show multicultural and international films at the Tower Theater second Friday of every month. And then since 2005, we have done the Fresno Film Festival in April. This is our 9th year, coming up April 19th through 21st is our 9th festival. And so we're basically a group of 15 or 20 film lovers. We love to spark conversation about multicultural and international issues through movies. And we love bringing films that don't come to any other theaters in Fresno to Fresno at the historic Tower Theater.
I was going to ask you about that. I saw the list of movies, which we will talk about in a little bit. These are not movies that you can find at the big movie theaters. Why is it important to have a project like this?
Absolutely. In Fresno, 4 of the 5 major movie houses are owned by one national theater chain. And what that usually means, and that situation is repeated in cities all across this country. What that situation means is it's a very limited number of films that get into people's availability. So what FilmWorks tries to do is it targets specific films that we feel are important to Fresno and the central San Joaquin Valley that won't come to those theaters because they're not big enough, they don't have a big enough distributor. Maybe the art house crowd is not the same crowd that's going to watch your Fast and the Furious 6. So we tend to target smaller films, films that have social messages, and we think we do that in a way that serves the region better than the big chains.
Do you think there's a misconception with people, and when they see a movie and it's grossed millions of dollars, and there are lines to watch the movie, sometimes we assume that movie was a good movie. Do you think that's a misconception?
Well, I don't want to necessarily get into the good movie versus bad movie. I think that's an evaluative, kind of thing. There's no accounting for taste. I think that big budget blockbuster films have just as much place in movies as a small art house film. I think it's a matter of taste. I also think, though, that the smaller art house films can potentially broaden people's horizons. They can show folks that there are different forms, different people's stories, different ways to make a movie and to enjoy a movie and share that movie. So I don't like to necessarily disparage the Fast and the Furious 6, but I think it's also good for people to kind of get outside their boundaries, and FilmWorks tries to provide that kind of experience both at the monthlies and at the festival.
So during the festival or the monthly, you watch these movies. Has there ever been a movie where you've seen and said, wow, that's a great movie?
Absolutely, every month. I don't want to, I was on the Fresno Film Works board for a couple years, 2007, 2009. I took some time off, and now I've been back on the board for a few months. And I've been a fan of FilmWorks from its inception. And I can honestly say in 11 years, I think I've maybe seen 1 or 2 films that I would say that are bad. And so that's a pretty great track record, like month in and month out, every month, to have something that's interesting, kind of like teases my brain a little bit. So yeah, I mean, there are films like that all the time. Most recently, this past November, we had a documentary called Searching for Sugar Man. It was an incredible Oscar-winning documentary about Sixto Rodriguez, long-lost Chicano folk singer from the 60s, considered by many the Chicano Bob Dylan, who was kind of lost to history. And this documentary traced these South African fans of his who found him in the internet era, restored his respectability, helped bring him into the public eye. It's a beautiful and groundbreaking and really kind of poetic documentary that, again, I would never have seen that at one of the other theaters. That's probably one of my favorite recent hits, and we were just lucky to get it, and it went on to win an Oscar. So even it's a bonus for us.
Let's talk about the process.
Okay.
You get films submitted to you, or do you solicit films? And then what happens once you have a video in your possession?
Great question. The selection process for the monthlies is slightly different from the festival. For the monthly series, the ongoing monthly series, we tend to get, it's a pretty wide open democratic process. All 15 members of our board kind of keep their eyes open on what art house films are playing in LA and San Francisco. We read the reviews, we see the trailers. Some of us actually see the films at other film festivals. And then as a board, we nominate them. Every board member gets 1 nomination. We discuss them as a group. We watch the trailers together, do some research on them. And then we vote, very democratic. The winning vote, we go after that in the booking. So that's how we do the monthlies. The festival is a little bit different. We have a programming committee made up of 5 members of the board that really focuses on the balance of the whole festival. And that includes, in addition to the feature films, short films that are submitted from all over the world. And those are first-run submitted shorts that we collect through a website called Without a Box. Mm-hmm. It's a website that takes submissions from short filmmakers from all over the world. So these are beginning filmmakers or small filmmakers who kind of want to get their short, experimental kinds of films out there. And this year, I think we had about 150 submissions, from which we picked 16 for the festival. So it's a very competitive process, and it always results in a pretty big variety too. Just this year in particular, there's drama, experimental, romance, fantasy, animation, and really kind of runs the gamut of style.
How long are these movies? Because I suspect that you won't be able to air something 4 or 5 hours long, yet
Sure.
You may not want to air something that's 5 minutes long.
Sure. The feature films are pretty standard, anywhere from an hour and a half to a couple hours. Same thing as you get at the art house. The short films, though, can be anywhere from 2 minutes to 25 minutes. I think 25 minutes is our limit. And so, for example, at this year's festival, we have 2 programs of shorts where there are 7 or 8 different short films put together in one program. And you see them back to back to back. So it's kind of like the old-fashioned movie experience where you would see a short film before a feature. This is a series of short films, one after another. And again, because they're kind of a mashup of styles and lengths, it gives the audience something a little bit different to kind of engage with.
How hard is it to make one of these films? I mean, you've watched plenty of these films in your career and your time on the board at
Sure.
Film Works. How hard is it actually to make this film?
I mean, well, I'm not a filmmaker myself, and I don't necessarily have the talent or the interest to be able to pull that off. But I mean, these filmmakers spend hours and hours and hours of their life working on these films. Sometimes just a 4 or 5 minute short film takes hundreds and hundreds of hours to film, edit, produce, promote, support while it's out on the festival circuit. So yeah, hundreds and hundreds of hours. And I think that for me as a viewer, I really appreciate that because I can see, the care and the love that kind of goes into those moments. And I think being mindful of that is something maybe we don't do when we go to the movies. We're maybe kind of lulled into that big blockbuster, big budget kind of a feel where it's millions of dollars to put out a film, where a small filmmaker, they're using their life savings, like Uncle John from down the street's writing them a check to to pay for post-production. And I like that kind of homespun feeling and how that kind of brings an added wrinkle to seeing those films up on the big screen.
The film festival. Mm-hmm. How many days is it? When is it?
This year, our 9th annual festival is April 19th through 21st. It's the third weekend in April. It's a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We have 7 programs over those 3 days. Friday night is the opening night film and reception. And then we have 3 programs each on Saturday and Sunday.
Is there a cost to attend? And then the favorite question of all questions when it comes to movies, popcorn. Is there popcorn?
The festival pass costs $40 in advance and $50 at the day of the show.
Okay.
That gets you admission to all the discussions, the opening night reception, and all the films. There are individual program tickets, $10 general, $8 for students and seniors. And those are all available at our website, fresnofilmworks.org, or at the Tower Theater box office. What was the second part of that question?
Popcorn.
Popcorn. Of course there's popcorn. FilmWorks actually has kind of an old-fashioned lo-fi approach to theater concessions. It's not that like $8 thing of popcorn you're going to get at the multiplex. We do have popcorn. I think it's only $3. It's delicious. We have lots of other good snacks. And I don't know if I can say this on the air, but we also sell booze.
Sure.
Okay. So again, something else you don't get at the big theater.
How supportive has the Tower Theater been to you, your organization? Second part of the question, How important is the Tower Theater to Fresno?
Great question. The Tower Theater has been with us, with Fresno Film Works, since almost the beginning. We started in 2002, as I said. We showed 16 millimeter films at the Fresno Art Museum for 3 months, and then after that moved to the Tower in mostly 35 millimeter since then. And they've been absolutely terrific. They're a historic Art Deco theater, heart of the Tower District, heart of Fresno. We feel that FilmWorks is a perfect match for that because the Tower Theater brings out the best and the most diverse in town, centrally located, beautiful space, and we're really thankful for them. Importance of the Tower Theater in the community, I think it can't be understated. It's one of the few independent, old-fashioned theaters that we have. I know that there are others downtown, like the Crest and the Hardys, but the Tower consistently books events all the time, and FilmWorks has always been proud and happy to be part of that programming, and we hope to stay there for a long time.
What audience do you want at these films? I mean, there may be some films that are not appropriate for children,
sure.
Yet there may be some films that are great to have children watch.
Yeah.
The audience, who should come to these movies?
FilmWorks has a pretty good core audience of folks who love to see, like I said, art house films, independent films, and that's kind of our core audience. They tend to be, the 50-plus types, Tower District types. But we also have a lot of Fresno creatives, young people. We're reaching out to college students and high school students, and we are attempting to get our message out to the greater community. I think that each film this year has a very different feel, and they also have some pretty big stars and big talking points that appeal to that core audience, but that also will be attractive to kind of your general Fresno film goer. So we hope that it's good for the creatives and good for the core audience, but also that people will kind of give some of the individual films a try. Maybe they haven't been to the theater before.
I'm on the fence. I don't know if I'm going to go.
Okay.
Why should I go?
First, again, interesting, unusual films that you can't see anywhere else in town. Films that haven't made it to the multiplex that we are offering, exclusively in Fresno. The other thing too is, again, because it's at the Tower Theater and because we do things a little bit differently at Film Works from the standard theater, is you get to participate in being part of a community. We have social gatherings, post-screening discussions. You can hang out in the lobby and talk to folks, and it's very cinema-minded. And so if you're looking for that kind of extra connection, that kind of conversation, I think that we do really well at providing that.
Opening night, it's always a special reception, always a special movie. Well, all the movies that you have are special. But how does the movie get selected for opening night, and what can people expect this opening night?
It's a good question. Opening night for us, we always want to book a comedy, something that is fun, that's light, that's celebratory, to kind of open things off. This year we have a French romantic comedy called Paris, Manhattan, and it's about a French pharmacist from a Jewish family who has a lifelong fascination with Woody Allen films. She thinks that Woody Allen films have the answer to everyone's ills. She hands out DVDs of Woody Allen films as prescriptions. So it's a really fun romantic comedy. We think that'll set the pace really nice for the festival. Afterwards, there's a champagne reception where, again, we welcome visiting filmmakers and the public and can kind of talk about the film too.
Our community in Fresno, we're a movie-going community. There's always lines when I go to the movies, especially one particular one in the north end of town.
Right.
Have they been supportive of the work that you all are doing at Fresno Film Works?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I can answer that specifically in terms of that big theater chain that they're avoiding mentioning the name of. I know that there is one theater in Clovis, the Sierra Vista, that's owned by a smaller regional company. They've been very supportive, at least behind the scenes to us. They've supported other film partners of ours, like the Swede Fest and some other folks like that, in having their events there. So I don't think that we're not supported, but there is a little bit of a competitive edge there in terms of booking films. Occasionally we will have what I like to think of as kind of a fringe indie, something that is kind of independent, that might sneak into one of those big theaters for a week or two, that we would really love to bring to our audience, but we take a risk because one of our goals is first-run films at our series. So I think there's a little bit of friendly competition in terms of programming, and I think that's healthy both for them and for us.
Do you air only new movies, or do you, let's say that someone created a movie late 80s. Sure. Well, late 80s is pushing it.
That's a classic.
Late 90s, say someone made a movie and it's been in a drawer. Right. They haven't had the confidence to air it. And all of a sudden they say, you know what, I want to air this movie. And they approach you, Jefferson Beavers, with the movie. What do you do?
Our primary focus at FilmWorks is first-run theatrical films. And so, it's first-run theatrical films, ones that are showing now. We do, at the festival, with the short films, have some movies that, as you're describing, maybe someone's been working on for years, they've dusted off a project and kind of finished it. Some of the short films sometimes can fall into that category. We did have a classic series for a little while, for about a year, that we did in coordination with the Tower Theater, that we showed old films. We showed Hitchcock's Psycho, we showed East of Eden, lots of older films. That program is on hiatus right now, but we hope to try and bring that back again in 2014. We do actually have one classic film coming up in May, and it's not that old. It's the 2008 film Be Kind, Rewind by Michel Gondry, and we're partnering with the Swede Fest to bring that film to the Tower Theater. So that'll be a nice symbiotic thing. We'll show the classic in the afternoon. Swede Fest will have their programming in the evening. So we do like to dip our toe into the classics water, and there are definitely a small but loyal group of Fresnans who like the classics. So we hope to bring that back at some point.
My wife loves the movies with the subtitles on the bottom of them. Even though she doesn't understand the language of the movie, she loves reading along. I can't do that. I get lost in the movie. But the reason I ask you that question is, do you ever show those films at the film festival?
Sure, subtitle films.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And we feel that international experience is part of something that Fresno doesn't get all the time. I always kind of tease my sister. She says, I don't want to read my film when I go to the movie. And I just tell her there's an awful lot of amazing filmmaking that you're missing by not giving that a try. And I would say, maybe close to half of our films are international films that have subtitles. Many of the films at the festival have subtitles, but they're also visually and thematically accessible in other ways. One example is our closing night film on Sunday night is the Spanish Snow White. It's called Blanca Nieves.
Okay.
And this is the classic story of Snow White as if the heroine was a 1920s Spanish bullfighter.
Interesting.
Pretty wild, right?
Interesting.
And so it's a silent film, which is an interesting selling point, but it's also has a flamenco score. There's a lot of dancing and flamenco in it. So again, it's not going to have any dialogue. It has minimal titling, but it's still visually lush. It's sonically lush, and I think people will still have a lot of, really interesting things to take away from it. It'll definitely be something different that they've never seen before in town.
The film festival's coming up.
Yes.
Tell our audience members when it is, what to expect, how to get tickets, and how to find out more information about your organization.
Absolutely. Fresno Film Festival, April 19th through 21st at the Tower Theater. That's the third weekend in April. Passes are $40 in advance, $50 at the door. Individual tickets, $10 for general, $8 student seniors. You can find all that information on fresnofilmworks.org.
Your sponsors.
Oh,
I saw your
yeah.
brochure, and I was impressed by the list of sponsors
We were blessed this
you
year.
have compiled. How important are they to this whole movement of letting people watch movies that are made locally or made privately?
Thank you so much for asking that question. FilmWorks is very fortunate this year to have more than 50 community sponsors, and it's our highest number of sponsors we've ever had, including 14 presenting sponsors, kind of at the top of that level. And simply put, FilmWorks would not be able to put on the event at all without the financial and logistical support of those sponsors.
Jefferson, thanks for coming on the program today and sharing with our audience a little bit about your organization. Sounds like you're doing some fantastic things.
Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate it.
That's all for this edition of San Joaquin Spotlight. Thank you to the volunteer crew that made this production possible. Thank you to KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC in Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Today we heard from Jefferson Beavers with Fresno Film Works. See you next week for a new edition.